Hello everybody. Today we are talking about the first 7 chapters of Prisoner of Azkaban. And there's so much happening in these opening chapters. I am completely overwhelmed with the number of things that I can talk about. But for today, I've decided to focus on chapter 2, which is called Aunt Marge's Big Mistake. So we haven't really spent a lot of time on the Dursleys, mostly because Privet Drive isn't really that interesting compared to Hogwarts and the rest of the magical world. And with the exception of the first book, they never really merit more than a chapter or two before we're rushed off to something much more exciting. But I want to spend some time on this chapter for a few reasons. The first reason is that this is the book in which Harry starts to think a lot about his dad. In the first book, he learns the truth about his parents' death, he inherits their money and his dad's invisibility cloak, and he sees them in the mirror of Erised. But all Harry really learns about his parents, aside from how they died, is that his dad played Quidditch and had some kind of beef with Snape, and that Harry, has his mother's eyes. We don't focus much on Harry's parents in Book 2, which directs our attention more to what Harry may have inherited from Voldemort. And that break between Book 1 and Book 3 gives Harry a chance to age a little bit, such that when we see him thinking about his dad more now, it's less as a small child, wishing that his parents were there to love and take care of him, and more as a teenager, thinking about what his dad was like at his age, and missing that opportunity to have a role model as he starts imagining himself growing into an adult. And then, of course, Harry's relationship with the memory of his father grows more complicated in the later books. But going back to the Dursleys in chapter 2 of this book, it's actually Aunt Marge, Vernon's sister, who introduces the topic of Harry's dad, James, that we're going to see throughout this book. Vernon and Petunia have always been really nasty about Harry's parents, but it's Marge who really takes it to a new level, calling James a no-account, good-for-nothing lazy scrounger, and then returning to this lie about their deaths, which, to be fair to Marge, she probably doesn't know that it's a lie, but she says that they died in a car crash and goes on to speculate that they were probably drunk. And that's what pushes Harry over the edge and causes him to blow up Marge and flee the house. One small side observation here. I'm going to talk about a different reading of what happens to Marge in a minute, but one thing that occurred to me here is that in Book 1, when Hagrid tells Harry he's a wizard, and Harry gets angry at Vernon and Petunia for keeping it from him, Petunia gives this really vicious monologue about Lily that ends with the revelation that Harry's parents didn't really die in a car crash. Specifically, what Petunia says is, she went and got herself blown up. That's the language that Harry hears the very first time he learns this information. So in this moment, when Marge is bringing up the car crash lie again, and maybe it's the first time anyone's even said it since that conversation, Harry wants to correct her, and I wonder if Petunia's monologue is running through his head, maybe below the surface, and that first framing of the truth is there. She got herself blown up. And so when Harry does this magic unintentionally, he blows up Aunt Marge, but in a different sense of that phrase. Another thing that I noticed in this chapter is that Aunt Marge, who is a dog breeder, is intensely and offensively focused on breeding and people, specifically Harry. And she uses the language of blood. She says it all comes down to blood, as I was saying the other day. Bad blood will out. Which is just interesting to see that parallel focus on bloodlines in the Muggle world, coming from a character who I can only assume that Lucius and Malfoy would find disgusting. Which sort of brings me to the main topic I want to cover in this chapter, and you may have seen this coming, but it's time to talk about the gratuitous descriptions of the Dursleys as fat. We've seen this in earlier books, but this is the chapter where it's so out of hand that I actually find it difficult to concentrate on what's going on in the narrative. And I want to preface this by saying that yes, there are good characters in the series who are described as overweight. But most often they're described in kinder terms. Mrs. Weasley is plump, Neville is round-faced. And there are villains who are thin. Tom Riddle's thin, Draco's thin. We even saw in Book 2 that Lockhart was not just thin, but extremely good-looking. And that's part of a larger message throughout the series that looks are deceiving, and you can't trust or dismiss people based on their appearance. Quirrell seems timid and harmless, but turns out to be literally sharing a head with Voldemort. Hagrid initially appears wild and a little scary, but we quickly find out that he's gentle and nurturing and kind. Again and again, the text points us to the idea that outward signifiers are not a good indication of a person's true character. Except for the Dursleys. To be clear, I'm not defending the Dursleys as people. Vernon is a child abuser, Dudley is a bully, Marge is just obscene in her viciousness to the point of caricature. These are not good people. But Rowling seems to indicate this, or illustrate this for us by telling us that unlike other characters, whose appearances don't necessarily match their personalities, in the case of the Dursleys, their inner ugliness is reflected in their outer ugliness. Sometimes, this ugliness is Petunia's horsey face, or Vernon's ugly purple color. But overwhelmingly, it's through pejorative depictions of body size. We know that Rowling often assigns minor characters some trait that makes them memorable. It's a kind of shorthand for the reader. So Colin's got his camera, Lockhart's got his pastel robes. Sometimes the trait is even physical and sometimes negative. Stan on the night bus has acne. Tom at the leaky cauldron is toothless. But generally, we only get that trait once per scene, usually at the beginning. So Toothless Tom doesn't show Harry to his room toothlessly and then prepare his breakfast without a tooth in his mouth. It's just one and done. Compare that to the Dursleys in Chapter 2. I counted 19 instances of the text reminding us that they're fat. And not just reminding us, more like beating us over the head with it. So for example, Dudley's piggy little eyes fixed on the screen and his 5 chins wobbled as he ate continually. A few pages later, and I'm skipping 5 more examples in 2 pages. Uncle Vernon clapped Dudley on his porky shoulder. I repeat, porky shoulder. A couple pages later, Dudley came waddling down the hall, his blonde hair plastered flat to his fat head, a bow tie just visible under his many chins. Why? Just why? This is gratuitous. Harry and Petunia, our thin characters, are described physically only once or twice in this chapter. Then Marge arrives. And she's not just fat, but also she's not performing her gender right. The first description says, she was very like Uncle Vernon, large, beefy, and purple-faced. She even had a mustache, though not as bushy as his. Her jaw is large, her hand is shovel-like, she burps, she drinks too much, she wipes her mustache. She's also implicitly compared to dogs. The verbs used for her dialogue are barked and growled, or sometimes boomed, which goes back to being too big and too unfeminine. Even the name of the man she keeps mentioning back at home, Colonel Fubster, it reads like a classic Rowling name, close enough to something like Flubber to keep the reader thinking about fatness. And when Harry loses control and accidentally performs magic on Marge, it takes the form of inflating her further. Just in case we missed it, Marge is fat. And now she's being punished for being awful by becoming even fatter. So what's the problem with this? If we think the narration is at least somewhat shaped by Harry's perceptions, then isn't this just Harry constantly noticing the ways in which the Dursleys don't conform to bodily norms because they're horrible to him and he hates them? I suppose that's possible. But even if that's the case, the Harry as implicit narrator reading is not one that most young readers come to on their first read through the series. Whereas these descriptions are right there on the surface. They're not at all subtle. So I'm not ready to give Rowling the benefit of the doubt here and say, oh, this is just a way to signal that the narration is colored by Harry's perspective. Like, I just don't believe that. Instead, I think we're getting a really mean series of fat jokes. And I think we're getting them because that's still considered an acceptable group of people to mock and shame, even in a children's book that specifically calls out bullying, and even in a larger narrative that repeatedly shows us that you can't rely on people's physical appearance to signal the kind of people that they are. And that's messed up. And it's messed up that these particular characters are cartoonishly cruel people, linking fatness with cruelty and then laughing at it. And it's messed up that one of them is only 13, the same age or slightly older than many of the young readers who don't yet have the tools to read this chapter critically. So that's pretty disappointing. It was honestly a relief to get to the next chapter where suddenly all of this stopped. It was strange. I felt like I shared Harry's relief. He's had this tenseness building and building, and when he gets outside a few streets away, he's still worried about what'll happen next. But the tension from the Dursley household dissipates. That's what I felt too, because suddenly the descriptions are normal. There's no more incessant reminders of anyone's body shape or weight, and the magic of Harry Potter is suddenly back. So I'm going to leave it there for now. If you didn't notice any of this, I encourage you to go back and look at chapter 2. You can maybe imagine being 8 or 9 and not happy with your weight. Or 13 or 14 and self-conscious about what puberty is doing to your body. I don't think that this chapter helps. So I said I was going to focus on chapter 2, but having mentioned Marge's failure to conform to bodily standards for women and how that becomes part of her characterization as ugly, I do want to spend just a minute on the Boggart scene and hopefully return to that in class. So, I love Lupin. He is one of my favorite characters. He's a really competent instructor who is queer-coded in several ways, so yeah, I am on Team Lupin. And this Boggart lesson is probably the best teaching that we've seen in the series so far. Which is why it's again disappointing that it includes this bit about the snake Boggart dressed up in Neville's grandmother's clothes. And in the same way that we might feel fine laughing at the Dursleys because they're bullies, we feel fine laughing at Snape, especially since it's Neville getting to take back some of the power that Snape's held over him the last 2 years. But we're also laughing at the idea of a man in a dress. It is literally the funniest thing imaginable. Men don't wear women's clothes. That would be ridiculous. And I'll be honest, in all the times that I read this book and saw the movie with Alan Rickman looking indignant in a green dress and black lacy gloves, I didn't give a ton of thought to this scene. But now we have Rowling, in her adult books, giving us the man dressing up as a woman to go kill people trope. And it just doesn't really feel great to see this man dressing up as a woman as something to mock trope in our kids' books. Also, for all of Rowling's claims about being a champion for real women, see real heavy air quotes there, this isn't even particularly generous to cis women. That the most disempowering thing that could happen to a man is to be seen as feminine? That's not cool, Rowling. Alright, so I look forward to hearing what stood out to you about these chapters.